First of all, do my thank yous and thank the Gallipoli Association for inviting me back to talk about this wonderful man that is often associated with Gertrude Bell. Oh no, crikey, this is my thing about load display. So, but has a fascinating life story himself. So although very much linked to Gertrude Bell, and lots of biographies have been written about Gertrude Bell over the years, this is perhaps a chance to get to know a little bit more about Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hotham Montagu Doughty-Wylie of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, born 1868, and that date you will know, the 26th of April 1915, is the second day of the Gallipoli campaign. And once again, before I start as well, I realise that a lot of people are coming from to listen to this talk from all over the world. So thank you very much. I'm really flattered, and thank you very much for joining in. I hope I can do him justice tonight. And then finally, as I said, if you hear any weird noises like a cuckoo or the pheasants or such like, it's outside, not me. So hopefully, if I press that one, oh gosh, hang on. There we go. So that's my next slide. I can hear somebody talking. Is that okay?
Yeah. No, I'll put them on mute. So carry on.
Okay, right. Okay, so Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hotham Montagu Doughty-Wylie was a hero to the Armenians. He was a hero to the Turks. There's a sort of more salacious thing was loved by two women, and finally who was the mystery woman at Gallipoli as well. And the talk will cover this and the life of Doughty-Wylie at before and after Gallipoli too. There's a picture of him, not quite Damian Lewis that played him in the film that we were discussing beforehand. I think it's Queen of the Desert, isn't it? And there he is. He's got a huge sort of percentage of his medals there, but there are much more to come. And if we look at those medals, they're absolutely fantastic. They're on display at Carnarvon Castle in North Wales, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers Museum, and so I'll better give it a plug, I think. And if you look at those medals, if you go from left to right, the first one you will see is his Victoria Cross, which he was awarded for his her bravery at Gallipoli. We've got, I'm not a medalist, by the way, so I'll have to fluff my way through this a little bit, but the B and C are... I can hear somebody, I'm sorry, somebody's coming in, yeah? There we go. The B and C are to do with India, the India General Service medals or an India medal. D is Sudan, E is South Africa, C is again an Africa medal. For Somaliland, where he was doing some work with the Camel Corps there. We've got the Pip, Squeak and Wilfred with the oak leaf, which is mentioned in dispatches. I think we've got another Sudan there. I might have mixed one up. If we go down to the bottom, we've got the two orders, the CMG and the Order of the Bath, Order of the Bath being the higher one. The lovely sort of multicolored orange-yellow star is the Star of Ethiopia. And then we get the two perhaps most interesting medals, because along with his Victoria Cross, there are two orders of Majidi, which was awarded by the Ottomans to Doughty-Wylie before World War I. There we go. The Doughty family home, and notice there's no Wylie on the end of that at the moment. The Doughty family home is at Theberton Hall in Suffolk. The house still exists today. I've been very lucky and honoured to go and stay there as a guest. The middle bit and the tower at the end, it's somewhat reduced now, the house, but the bit that you see nearest to you with the bay windows still exists. It's a beautiful house, absolutely lovely. And but a lot of the sort of, when they give you a biography of Doughty-Wylie, they'll say that he was born there, but he was not. He was born Charles Hotham Montagu Doughty, on the 23rd of July, as I said beforehand, 1868, and he was born at Gloucester Place in Marylebone in London. I think that I think it was hit by bombs in the Second World War and has been demolished now. His father, Henry, was a solicitor, and as yet he had not inherited Theberton Hall when Doughty-Wylie, when Doughty was born. Gloucester Place, as I said, has been demolished. And the other thing to note as well is he's a great traveller. I'll call him Doughty-Wylie because that's how we all know him about, or Dick Doughty-Wylie. This was Doughty-Wylie's uncle, Charles Doughty, and you can see where his name's come from. He's named after him. And he wrote this fantastic book. I don't think it's ever been out of print, Arabia Deserta in 1908. And this book inspired lots and lots of people from the past and up to today as well. T. Lawrence, he wrote the introduction to the 1921 edition. Wilfred Thesiger, again, a great Arabist who only died quite recently. He was also related to the family. Benedict Allen, the modern day explorer with his camels and things. Rory Stewart, the ex-MP, and has his links with Afghanistan and Iraq. So as well as those people, the book, or his chats and talks with his uncle, I think inspired Charles Doughty-Wylie to do a lot of traveling in his life as well. Hopefully, go back onto that, go on to the next one. So the Doughty family home, as I said, is in Theberton. And he was the first of 7 children, only 2 sons as far as I can work out, and 5 sisters as well. But his younger brother is worth noting because, as you will see, he was a Rear Admiral Henry Montagu Doughty, also a companion of the Bath as well. And it's worth noting a little bit about his biography as well, because in 1914 he was commanding a gunnery school at Devonport, which is the home, of course, of the Navy in the south. He had a rather exciting life as well. He was present at the Mexican Revolution. He commanded HMS Abercrombie, and that boat arrived, or that ship arrived at Mudros in July 1915. And I'd ask you to just bear that in mind when we get onto the talk a little bit later on about who the lady at Gallipoli was. Promoted senior officer to the 1st Squadron on the Gallipoli Peninsula. And again, the date is notable as well, the 16th of November 1915. And he remained at Helles until the end of November 1915. Later on, he commanded HMS Agincourt at Jutland, and he ended his career, his naval career, as a rear admiral. So he's also got quite a distinguished military career as well. And as you can see, he died not long after Dick Doughty-Wylie himself in 1921. So Theberton Hall, well, I'm not very good at Latin, but Palma non sine pulvere is translated not by me, but by somebody that can speak Latin or understand Latin, no praise without hard work. And I do think that is a motto that Doughty-Wylie took with him all his life. He worked very, very hard at everything he did. I'm not always too sure that things came naturally to him, but he ensured that he knew things because he worked very, very hard to know these bits and pieces. Hadn't very much, I think the family might be considered, it's a word we don't use anymore now, gentry. They certainly were not in the aristocratic class, neither were they without money though, and land. I think they had about 7,000 quite nice acres, I think, in Suffolk. But he had the sort of traditional sort of route in life that sort of upper middle class boys do have. Cornwallis or Cornwall's prep school before he got a scholarship to Winchester College. He was a house prefect. He was a member of the debating society. He certainly knew Greek and Latin. He rowed, he played rackets, cricket and football. He seems to have been a good all-rounder. And in 1885, he wins, as I said, the Warden and Fellows Prize for Classics. So here's not just a military man, it's what I think I would call a thinking military man as well. And he leaves Winchester College in 1887. I think the scholarship possibly suggests that the family didn't have a huge amount of money to go spare. And then from Winchester, he takes the military route. He clearly wanted a military career because he takes himself off to Sandhurst after leaving Winchester, and he's there in 1887. So it's his height of the empire, isn't it? You know, height of Victoria's fantastic empire. And he does well in Sandhurst. He comes second in his year, and he leaves in 1889. He's not commissioned into, again, not into one of the sort of star regiments like the Guards, where you needed a little bit of money and such like to progress. But he's commissioned. I'm very proud that he has been into the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. And I've used the old-fashioned spelling there that was current in 1889. So that you can barely read it, but that's the best I can do for his entry into the Sandhurst academic register. Different countries where Doughty-Wylie served. Well, ignore the Reds, that's the British Empire. But if you look, he certainly got around a little bit. The numbers will tell you a little bit more. It's not a brilliant map to put on for a Zoom presentation, but he's up there in China, number 6. 1 and 2 tell you that he's there on the northwest frontier, and we'll come to that a little bit later. The middle part we can see is Turkey, and there's a short time that he spends in Crete as well, and then quite a lot of the majority of his time in Africa as well. So that's Abyssinia, the Sudan, and then down to the bottom, which is South Africa as well. So he traveled, and he didn't only travel with the military. He was a great traveler himself. If he went to Europe, quite often he would land at the bottom of Europe and travel right back into Great Britain, taking off time to see places like Venice and Paris and such like. So he was curious and followed really in his uncle's footsteps in having that traveling bug that got him to take him around places as well. And as Brian and I have found out over the years, he did a lot of traveling with his wife, Lily, as well. A little bit, just go through it a little bit. In 1891, so he's joined the RWF in India, and he's part of the Hazara field force. And Hazara is right up the top, near the Himalayas and such like. And he, the northwest frontier, that very romantic frontier that we were sort of worried about Russia, coming down and taking India and such like. There's lots of border fighting with all sorts of tribes, and he's part of the Hazara field force, fighting the tribes in the Black Mountains and such like. And he gets his first wound on this one. He had several wounds while leading a charge, and he's promoted to lieutenant as well. By 1895, he's back again. Chitral fort is not far away from the northwest frontier, and it was under siege. And the gentleman that was in charge, who was within the fort as well, was Major General Charles. Well, he wasn't a Major General then, but Charles Townshend. And he becomes there's a relief force sent to relieve the fort there. Charlie Townshend is holding the fort against all these sort of tribes and warring tribes and such like, and with some success they manage to sort of overcome the situation. And Charles Townshend makes his name in history. He becomes known as Chitral Charlie, of course, only to later on in World War I be in charge of the troops at Mesopotamia, who at the end, when they have to, when they don't survive the battles, he doesn't come out of it looking very well either. He doesn't really sort of, look very much in charge. So losing my what we call it a bit here, but anyway, 1897 to 1898 sees, strangely enough, almost like a NATO force is sent to Crete, because there are ructions, of course, in the Ottoman Empire as well. There's rebellions all over the place, but the RWF go off to Crete. And it's interesting because King George I was installed as the head of state, and he was grandfather to our own Prince Philip, who died quite recently, and of course has connections with the Gallipoli Association as well. By 1898, he's in the Sudan with Kitchener, and he's attached to the Egyptian army as a brigade major, and he's present at the Battle of Omdurman. I think this is Kitchener's revenge for Gordon of Khartoum, and he's there with the expeditionary force in 1899 as well. By 1900, he moves down the African continent, and he is a participant in the Second Anglo-Boer War, and he commands a battalion of mounted infantry as a flying column, and they are chasing the Boer general Christian de Wet, who has escaped from prison. So it's all again boys' own stuff, but he is very severely wounded this time at Vredefort in July 1900. So he has clasps with Transvaal and Pretoria as well, and sorry, Witburg and Transvaal and Cape Colony. He's badly wounded. He ends up going back to India to recover as well. By 1902, he gets around to China this time round, and he's there as part of the relief for the legations at Peking for the Boxer Rebellion that's taking part there. Here's some little sort of boys' own pictures for you. There's the Hazara Black Mountain expedition, as we said, on the North Wales frontier, 1891. There's a medal with Queen Victoria on the reverse. This is a fantastic picture that we have in the archive of the relief force, some of the RWF going up there to relieve Chitral Fort. And I always love this picture because you see all the little dogs. These are all the soldiers' dogs following them that they had as companions there. And then we've got the medal there, the relief of Chitral, 1895. There was no medal for this, and there's very little actually in the history books that I could find to talk about it, apart from the fact that it had a connection with Prince Philip. But anyway, that was a short time of Doughty-Wylie's career was spent in Greek. But of course, it signals, of course, that the Ottomans are beginning to lose a grip on the situation. Battle of Omdurman, again, revenge for General Gordon's death at Khartoum, a rather idealized picture there. And there we've got a very, very severe Kitchener. Is he a Sirdar? I can't remember what he called himself, with the hat on as well. And there's one of the Sudan medals as well for 1898. And then the Second Anglo-Boer War, 1899 to 1901. Doughty-Wylie gets himself a QSA there with three clasps to it too. Boxer Rebellion, Tientsin in China. Again, I don't think he saw as much action as he'd like to, but he was certainly there. I have to move my top a little bit from here down to the bottom. There we go. So in 1903, he was in secondment in British Somaliland, East Africa, as a special service officer. And I think this sounds rather romantic. He commanded a detachment that's the Somaliland Camel Corps, but I'm afraid the diary doesn't really sort of say much about it. I don't think he really saw much action there. There was disorder, as there was throughout the empire all the time, with bits and pieces under Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, who was named the Mad Mullah, and it's a campaign that lasted well past Doughty-Wylie's own life, and it's noted for the first use of aerial bombardment as well. So he returns to India with the RWF, and in 1904 he's married, and then there's the 3 stars there to denote that he marries Lillian Adams-Wylie, a widow. Her husband had died of enteric fever in South Africa. He had been a doctor. She'd gone out there to help nurse as well, and he takes a change in career too. I think this is possibly under Lily's influence as well. So he goes into sort of military diplomatic corps, and in 1906 he's acting vice consul at Messina and Konya, which is in Asiatic Turkey. By 1907 he's promoted to major, and he's also appointed Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. More about that afterwards, about events at Adana. He's promoted, he goes off to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and he's awarded that rather fantastic sort of decoration. If anybody can ever tell me, I did hear a rumor that it was for saving one of the royal family of the Ethiopians, but I really don't know too much about that as well. By 1912, he's appointed Director-in-Chief of the Red Cross, and he's with Turkish units operating in Turkey during the First Balkan War, and his wife Lily serves alongside him as Superintendent of Nursing, and we'll get a little bit more about Lily in not too distant future. So hopefully we move the next slide on. So here we go. Here's some little pictures with the medals. Lovely picture of the Somaliland Camel Corps, looking very exciting. There's a medal that goes with it. And then we're going to look at the marriage and his time at the diplomatic corps. I think that's Delhi, the gate of India. So it is possible that Dick met Lily in South Africa, but Brian, Graham and I think have sort of discounted that a little bit. She was there nursing troops, but it's probably a bit more sort of a romantic story than truth. But it's more likely that the couple fell in love in India in 1902 when he was on sick leave. He comes back from Somaliland and he proposes marriage, and Lily accepts it. And they marry in Bombay in 1904. There's a picture there on top of Dick at the bottom of Lily. I could pick her out, just about pick her out in the middle there, but it's very, very small. Again, let me move that up to the top a little bit. Lily is an absolutely fascinating character. Now I can just see Brian smiling now, of course. Lily Wood, as she was born in 1878, so she's only about 10 years younger than Dick. She was born Newton Abbot in Devon. She came into a very large inheritance, which would be worth millions and millions today, very early on in life, left to her by John Wylie, who had eventually married her mother in the mid-1880s after Lily was born. And she trained as a nurse in Glasgow. She was absolutely fantastic small waist there in her nursing uniform. Her first marriage, as I mentioned before, was to Charles Henry Adams, and he took on her surname, so they became Mr. and Mrs. Adams-Wylie. Charles was a doctor who worked for the Indian Medical Service, and the couple set up a hospital in Bombay, largely, I think, through Lily's money as well. When war broke out in South Africa, Charles Adams-Wylie was sent out there, and sadly he died of enteric fever, the fate of many out there in South Africa, on the 2nd of June 1900. So very, very quickly, Lily becomes a widow, but she continued to work at the hospital in Bombay. And there's a picture of Charles Adams-Wylie there. Not much known about him, really. Of course, he was quite young when he died. And this is what Dick had to say about Lily. This is a diary entry. His diaries are vast. I'm still going through them bit by bit. But this is what he said about Mrs. Adams-Wylie's hospital. So, excuse me. On October the 15th, 1900, the lady, Mrs. Adams-Wylie, landed in Bombay. She had been there before and fed many thousand people during the famine. And now a widow from South Africa, she meant to work where she knew work was wanted. On the 17th, Mr. W.L. Harvey, the Commissioner of Bombay, had showed her the old native hospital in Grant Road. 18 months before, the rioters had attacked it and the nurses had to be rescued. It had been a hospital for plague, smallpox and famine. And on October the 17th, 1900, there were 115 famine patients in it, suffering from dysentery, pneumonia and sheer starvation. Cases died in the street before they could be carried to the hospital, and the death rate was 40% of admissions. The nursing staff for all these cases was all native, one ayah and one ward boy on duty by day, and a similar relief at night. Help was obviously badly wanted, and Mrs. Adams-Wylie took charge of the nursing department. This was what she did. Work began at 7 a.m. and went on till noon, began again at 2 p.m. and went on till 7 p.m. There was no place to sit down, nobody to talk to, only a shed where she had left her hat and where the crows used to steal the sandwiches she bought for lunch. She gave her time and services for nothing. To get to the place from her hotel, she had to go through the worst quarter of Bombay, and stones were thrown at her, and one day a large lump of wood actually grazed her head. She asked for police protection, and day by day went on quietly with the work. Now you saw the size, the diminutive size of Lily, and you can see that this woman has got the, absolutely the guts of a lion, hasn't she? So they marry, and Dick Doughty now becomes Dick Doughty-Wylie, and as a couple, of course, they became known as Mr. and Mrs. Doughty-Wylie. They honeymooned on the northwest frontier, so that's going back to Dick's old haunts, and apparently in the diaries they sort of shoot anything that had two legs or feathers on it or fur. They returned on this fantastic journey back to England via Babylon and the Golden Crescent, Iraq, into Syria and such like. The diaries, both by Dick and by Lily, are absolutely fascinating, and both Brian and I have worked on them and just astounded by what they did as well. And they roughed it. They didn't stay in fancy hotels or things like that. They actually roughed it. In 1906, Dick, I think, slightly fed up with military life, being wounded 3 times, and possibly with the urging of Lily, as I said before, joined the consular department military, and he took up the post of vice consul at Konya in Turkey. And as I said before, that's Asiatic Turkey as well. So a little bit of look at his diplomatic life. There's Konya, Adana and Messina. They've all got different names now, sadly, but that's the area that we're looking at below Ankara today in Turkey. Now, whilst this is happening, of course, big things are going on in the world as well that will eventually lead up to the First World War. And as we learned that was unrest in Crete earlier on, the Ottoman Empire was literally referred to as the sick man of Europe. Oh, that's a Punch cartoon, I think, there. From around 1850 to 1922, when Kemal Ataturk, of course, forms a new secular nation of Turkey. A great deal of unrest among ethnic minorities, and in particular the Armenian Christians as well. We have the rise of the Young Turks, of which Ataturk is one of them, and they wished for a more secular, modern state. They wanted to see things run not on medieval lines, but on a more modern line. And they asked for the abolition of the absolute monarchy of Abdul Hamid II in 1908. And for a while, it looks as though this might happen. It might happen, but things go drastically wrong shortly afterwards. And there's wars with Greece, Russia, Serbia. Really, they've run out of money. They're in a poor state, and things are going bad. So while he's a vice consul, this lady comes into his life that we were talking about earlier on before the talk, and this is Gertrude Bell. And this is largely how Doughty-Wylie, the life of Doughty-Wylie, has been discovered through the fantastic biographies that have been recently written about Gertrude Bell as well. So in 1907, she visits the consulate on one of her archaeological travels, and she meets a couple, Dick and Lily, for the first time. And she refers it, she had extensive diaries, and she refers to Doughty-Wylie in her diary as a charming young soldier. They're actually born, I think, the same year. And his quite pleasant little wife, rather an underestimation, I think, on Miss Bell's part of Lily, because she certainly wasn't the little wife, definitely not. These photographs were taken by Gertrude Bell, I believe, on her visit to the Doughty-Wylies between the 10th and the 14th of May 1907. And again, you can see Dick looking rather handsome there, and Lily liked sort of frilly dresses and hats, the fashion at the time. Again, very small, very diminutive, that absolutely tiny waist that was very fashionable. These are in, I think, the Gertrude Bell archive notes them as being in the Konya, in their house at Konya. And of course, I will need to point out, being an absolute dog lover, that they have their own dog there. You can just about see him because it's a very, I think it's a black spaniel or such like. So these are taken in the garden at Konya as well. Everybody looks very happy, and Lily's got this fantastic hat and frilly dress on as well. We mentioned the Young Turks. Things are, beginning to change, and the Armenians, who within the Ottoman Empire had been treated quite badly, the Christian Armenians, they hoped for a more liberal and moderate way of life that might come from this new secular, Ottoman Empire or Turkish Empire, and that they wouldn't be hounded for their religious beliefs that were Christian. So these are the events that are going on in the background when Dick and Lily are at Konya. So at Adana, news reached the region that a counter-offensive was underway. And this is the Ottomans, in a way, trying to put down, and they did successfully put down the new young Turks that were looking for a much more modern Turkey. So on the 25th of April, an ironic date as well, 1909, news arrived that Armenians were being massacred by the Turks at Adana. So once he heard this, Dick and Lily rode there immediately. So it wasn't that far away from where they were. On his own initiative, Doughty-Wylie asked the local Turkish governor for a small force, took command and constantly rode through the streets in his military uniform, accompanied by a small band of Turkish soldiers, which he had to corral together. And despite being wounded in the arm, he quelled the riot and averted an absolute total massacre, although there was much murder that day. Lily, not to be, underdone as well, subsequently sets up 3 improvised hospitals for the traumatized and the wounded. And this is from Doughty-Wylie's diary. He says, there was a very dangerous feeling in that town. Threats had been freely offered. There were some murders. So little had I expected that any massacre was imminent that I took my wife with me. About 2 stations from Adana, we saw a dead body. The nearer we got to Adana, the more bodies there were. And while I was escorting my wife to Mr. Trimpani's house, 2 or 3 more men were killed under the very noses of the Turkish guards. So basically they were ignoring what was happening to the Armenians. We paraded through the town with bugles blowing. We cleared the streets, sometimes by charging with the bayonet and sometimes by firing over the heads of the crowd. And then this rather sort of saying at the end, those were the days. This is the monument to the Armenians. I can't pronounce the actual place, but it's near Yerevan in Armenia. And in a dispatch to London, Doughty-Wylie wrote, the villagers where no exact number can yet be given. The loss may be estimated at between 15,000 to 20,000 in many cases. Women, even small children, were killed with the men. And this is a prelude to the 1915 genocide of Armenians that estimates, I don't think people can get a number to hand, but 600,000 to 1.4 million Armenians died. And then the Ottomans believed that the Armenians would join forces against them in World War I, and this is partly the reason for the terrible destruction to these people as well. Richard Bell Davis, who himself would be awarded a Victoria Cross for his attack at Farajic Junction in Bulgaria. He was commanding one of the Mediterranean fleets, and he says, he took part in the Zeebrugge raid as well. He was on board HMS Swiftsure, and he wrote a bit of a biography about his time in the war and before. So he was sent to the port of Mersin or Mersina with an armed party to quell the massacre. And he states in Sailor in the Air, that's his biography, that without the intervention of Doughty-Wylie, the situation would have been much worse. And there he is with his terrier as well, Richard Bell Davis. Worth a read, it's a good book. For saving the lives, and again, I'll just move this down a little bit, for these actions as the heroic vice consul, because this story went all around the world by telegraph to America, Australia, Europe and such like. The heroic vice consul Doughty-Wylie was awarded the Cross of St. Michael and St. George, the CMG, for saving the lives of thousands of many nationalities. Doughty-Wylie was also awarded the Order of Majidi as well. So he became, this is later on, so he became somewhat a celebrity at home with reports in several newspapers. So you can contrast those 2 medals there with what happened. Gertrude Bell wrote to him, and it's often seen as the start of their friendship. Maybe it sort of took on a bit more of a friendship after that. His right arm was broken by a bullet, but it didn't prevent him from riding out once more. And I think after the outbreak of the massacre, he saved many, many more lives as well. So let me put you all back up to the top there. That one there. Oops. I'll read my thing. Oops. Next one. Oh, crikey, yeah, do that again. So back to Gertrude. As we said, they met in 1907. By 1912, there was this allegedly chaste but passionate affair was conducted largely through letters between Dick Doughty-Wylie and herself. Dick refused to leave his wife, but it's likely that it was possibly a somewhat one-sided affair. It's very difficult to make assumptions so far away. By August 1914, war was declared, but for Gertrude, Dick Doughty-Wylie was the love of her life. So let me put that up there again. So we're just a little bit what happened afterwards. He went to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. He's promoted. He's awarded the Star of Ethiopia 3rd class. And once again, he's doing work for the consul as well. So in 1913, he's awarded the Imperial Ottoman Order of Mejidi. That's by the Sultan of Turkey for his work with the British Red Cross hospitals in Turkey. By 1913, he's in Albania, so another place that he goes to as well. But by 1914, he gets the higher order, the Order of the Bath. And by 1915, he's promoted to lieutenant colonel. When war breaks out, he obviously feels that he may be needed, and he ends up in Cairo, where he meets General Sir John Maxwell in 1915, and it's there where he's appointed to join the staff of General Sir Ian Hamilton of the MEF. On the 25th of April, he lands at Gallipoli he's on the troop, he gets transferred to the River Clyde, and the following day he leads a successful assault at the fort at Sedal Bar. Almost at the top of the hill, of course, he's shot in the face and dies instantly, and he's posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. So let's pick that apart a little bit. So from October the 12th to May the 13th, there's this war going on with the Ottomans against the Balkans, and Doughty-Wylie is there as well. By 1912, he takes leave from his job as a consul, and he takes another turn as well. Again, I think possibly maybe thought that Lily might have some part in doing this as well, making him change career. And he's director-in-chief of the British Red Cross in Turkey, and his wife goes out as superintendent of nurses or nursing. By the time war was declared, Dick and Lily had returned to Addis, and Dick offers his services to the military as well. There's one of the orders, that's the lower one, I think, of the Order of Mejidi 5th class as well. But that is a very, very high order. So again, all the efforts to save the Armenians at Adana, all the work with the Turks with the Balkan War as well, and his own military experience. It's just amazing, really, what he did in his life as well. Now, probably the bit that's going to interest us all here more than anything else is his time at Gallipoli, and of course it's very, very short as well. This is this graphic map that we all use as well, and we'll be concentrating on the bottom, of course, at Helles. So the story we know is it's called The Great Gamble. It had never been done before. It's sometimes referred to as the first D-Day. So there was a request from the Russian government to help their Black Sea ports, which is very topical at the moment, with Russia as well. Were being bombarded by the Turkish Navy. Trade was difficult, and the grain supplies were blocked as well. So Churchill, hero or villain, I'm never too sure, really. Such a complicated man, devises a plan to sail the British fleet up the Dardanelles, the Straits, and to take Constantinople. It's even controversial for the time. The first Sea Lord goes off in a huff and he resigns, Jackie Fisher. I'm not sure myself, looking at it with no naval experience whatsoever, I would have thought that they would have had some trouble just even getting into Constantinople, but had it worked, we don't know. Gallipoli is the campaign of what ifs. On the 18th of March, the British fleet, we know, tries to force the Narrows. The strait, of course, it's been sort of telegraphed a little bit beforehand what was going to go on. So the Turks have heavily mined the strait. 4 battleships are sunk. And I'm not sure if it's apocryphal, but apparently the Turks were nearly out of shells. I'm not sure if that was true or whether that's a fact, but anyway, it's you can read it quite often in the books and the histories. So the plan alters completely to landing troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula, which we know takes place on the 25th of April, 1915. Doughty-Wylie is chosen obviously by Sir Ian Hamilton because he didn't have a huge amount of choice. We know that the war is going on the Western Front, and that anyone that had any experience was out there almost immediately, who had any experience of command as well. And he's chosen by Hamilton as some say with intelligence, or some say as an observer to join Hamilton and his people on board the SS River Clyde. And there's a picture. I know Hamilton is a very slight man in pictures, and he comes across, but I hadn't perhaps realised how tall and well-built Doughty-Wylie was before. I had imagined him as much slimmer. So that there they are anyway, talking to each other. So the idea of the landings were that 6 different landings would take place, as you well know, S, V, W, X and Y beaches by British troops, and then Z beach, which we really just know as Anzac now, further around the peninsula. Doughty-Wylie would be this observer on the SS River Clyde that had been run ashore, the Trojan horse, to land troops on V Beach. The Sed El Bahr fort was very heavily defended. Again, it had been somewhat telegraphed, and Doughty-Wylie and others could see that the landing had gone disastrously wrong as well. Let me move that one. Oh, I've got to go back a bit. And from if I move that back up again, from the peninsula, the bottom part, which always looks like either a dog's nose or a toe there, but I'm not too sure, is we can see how strategic V Beach was. Sed El Bahr, the fort is there, and the old town of Sed El Bahr, and the River Clyde, just that little bit there. We can see that it needs to be taken, because while S Beach is sort of taken quite easily, Detot's battery and such like, and the stuff going on with the Lancashire landings, X Beach later on I think gets a lot of trouble, and Anzac, of course, they miss where they're going, but this is so strategic here in the middle that losing it or not even achieving any toehold on it would have been disastrous. And there's a good Turkish army there as well. The Turkish Fifth Army consisted of around 80,000 men. We know from our history books that the Turkish invited the German General Liman von Sanders to oversee the troops, and he was given command of the peninsula by the Turks. And it's considered that the troops that, of course, that fought in the Balkan War of 1912-1913, which Doughty-Wylie had observed himself with his medical services, that these were veteran troops and knew how to fight as well. So the Trojan horse, this is the wonderful SS River Clyde, which I believe went on to actually work afterwards. It was patched up and worked afterwards as well, sailed again. In the hold, in the cargo hold, there's troops that are concealed from the 2nd Munsters, the 2nd Hampshires, the Munsters and the Dubs. There to land at the beach via rowing boats and all sorts of other paraphernalia to attack V Beach early in the day. There's again, this must be after events, of course, because we can see the River Clyde beach there. And these were some of the diary entries that we've got. And this will give us a taste of how desperate the situation was. Guy Geddes with the 1st Munsters, his diary, you can read that online as well. I felt we were for it, that the enterprise was unique and would demand all I was possible of giving and more, that it was no picnic but a desperate venture. I just longed to get on with it and be done with it. I felt I was no hero and that I had not the pluck of a louse. My nerves were tense and strung up, and yet I never doubted we would not win through. I think there might have been a slight bit of editing there afterwards. Raymond Lane, all the way down the side of the ship, bullets crashed against the side. On reaching the first barge, I found some of the men had collected and were firing. I mistrusted the 2nd barge and the track to the shore, so I led them over the side. The water came nearly up to our shoulders. However, none of us were hit and we gained the bank. any man who put his head up for an instant was shot dead. Guy Geddes again says, we got it like anything. Man after man behind me was shot down, but they never wavered. Lieutenant Watts, who was wounded in 5 places and lying on the gangway, cheered the men on with cries of follow the captain. I think he survived, actually. I think no finer episode could be found of the men's bravery and discipline than this, on leaving the safety of the River Clyde to go to what was practically certain death. So, I mean, this is, you know, really like scenes from hell, really, isn't it? So V Beach again, after you can see the state of the place after events. And then this is perhaps the best, this is the account of Doughty-Wylie that we have in the regimental records, Royal Welsh Fusiliers, and it's not by somebody from the regiment, an officer from the regiment. It's for Guy Warnford Nightingale. So he tells us that senior officers were urgently required. Colonel Doughty-Wylie and Captain Walford took charge of the situation at once. After collecting together the whole force, which consisted of survivors of the Munsters and the Dublin Fusiliers, 2 companies of the Hampshires under Major Beckwith, Doughty-Wylie ordered us to charge in one mass into the castle and occupy it. He led the charge himself. He was carrying no weapon of any description at the time, only a small cane, and much is made of this. Did he do this because he didn't want to fire on the Turks? Was it just one of those things? There's quite a lot of descriptions of senior officers going into battle with just walking sticks. At least there were 2 on the Western Front. There were Royal Welsh Fusiliers that did the same and died as well. Or is it just he had a revolver but we never saw it or something? So here's the idea wasn't totally Doughty-Wylie's. It was a conglomeration of senior officers, including Captain Garth Walford, who saw that the situation was desperate on the 26th. If they didn't take V Beach, the rest of the landings would just really go awry. And it's worth, I think, mentioning Walford because he sort of gets forgotten with the Doughty-Wylie story as well. He was an officer, joined from a young age, same background as Doughty-Wylie, Harrow, Balliol College, Oxford, artillery first, served in France early on with the 27th Brigade Royal Artillery, and he took part in the retreat from Mons, so he'd actually seen a little bit of battle as well before he went out to Gallipoli. Off he goes in March 1915, arrives at Lemnos, 12th of April. He's on board as well, observing the initial bombardment, and Doughty-Wylie see that very few senior officers were either survived being killed or wounded, and that the men needed organisation to get together to make an attack on both sides of the village that, although at the end of the day was successful and saved the day, cost both Walford and Doughty-Wylie their lives. I took the picture of his grave at V Beach, and there's the original cross there for Captain Walford, VC, so he was also awarded Victoria Cross as well. Hill 141, which leads up to the fort, is known as Doughty-Wylie Hill. The assaulting troops, as I said, were led by Doughty-Wylie and also a Major Grimshaw. At the last moment, Doughty-Wylie was killed by a shot in the head. It's said that he died almost instantly, and he was buried rather dramatically at midnight. I think by the brother of a Royal Welsh Fusilier as well. Major Grimshaw, as we know, also lost his life. And he's worth noting as well because he has a link to Churchill. He served in the Boer War, and he was also captured at Talana and was a prisoner of war in Pretoria at the same time as Winston Churchill. And his diary records these experiences, and it's a boy's own diary. You can read it online as well. Churchill referred to the then Lieutenant Grimshaw in his London to Ladysmith semi-autobiographical work. So he's mentioned there. Cecil was one of the few officers to survive the slaughter of the 25th of April, as the battalion and most of the 86th Brigade came ashore via the scuttled River Clyde, but he was killed the following day, leading his troops in breaching the Turkish wire in front of Sed El Bahr. So he doesn't get away with his life either, and he's posthumously mentioned in dispatches. So there we go. That's the official citation in the London Gazette for Doughty-Wylie and Neville Walford for their Victoria Crosses. And this is an idealized picture of the Doughty-Wylie charge going up the hill towards the fort. And then we know that this is the only single memorial to an individual soldier on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and that's Doughty-Wylie's grave at Saddlebar. So Ian Hamilton reports that during the advance, Captain Walford was killed. Colonel Doughty-Wylie had most gallantly led the attack all the way up from the beach to the west side of the village under a galling fire. And now, when, owing so largely to his own inspiring example and intrepid courage, the position had almost been gained, he was killed while leading the last assault. But the attack was pushed forward without wavering, and fighting their way across the open with great dash, the troops gained the summit and occupied the old castle and hill 141 before 2 p.m. V Beach Cemetery, where Major Grimshaw and Captain Walford are buried. Subsequent to a landing having been effected on the beach of the Gallipoli Peninsula, during which both Brigade General and Brigade Major had been killed, Colonel Doughty-Wylie and Captain Walford organised the attack on the old castle. The enemy was strongly entrenched. It was mainly due to the initiative and skill and gallantry of these two officers. The attack was a complete success. Both were killed at the moment of victory. Doughty-Wylie was buried where he fell. And that's his Victoria Cross, which I took to Theberton some years back now. You know, an evaluation. Doughty-Wylie's knowledge of Turkey and his military connections would have been invaluable to Sir Ian Hamilton. So he was appointed this intelligence officer. It's a little bit different to intelligence today. Hamilton had few senior officers with war experience to choose from. We know from Doughty-Wylie's military career that he was able to make decisions swiftly. He recognised the situation was unstable on V Beach and something had to be done. Had it not been secured, it's likely the whole plan would come apart. Modern historians were able to assess future decisions like D-Day and Dieppe and such like by these decisions taken at Gallipoli in World War I. Had Doughty-Wylie, of course, survived, almost certainly he would have played a further part in World War I, either in the Middle East or on the Western Front. Lily and Gertrude. Well, there's Lily in her lovely dress in the gardens at Adana again, and there is Gertrude looking absolutely fantastic on this beautiful horse. I think it's in the Lebanon, is it Duris in the Lebanon? Two different women, both extremely rich women, both underestimate Lily at your own devil chance. Both women very, very much in charge of their own lives in a sense. Lily had worked throughout the war, largely financed hospitals herself in France and on the island of Tenedos. After the war, she worked for the Imperial War Graves Commission, registering graves in Gallipoli, obviously to be nearer to her husband's memorial. There was some talk of building a huge, great big memorial there at one point. Very little is known about Lily's life after the death of her husband, Dick Doughty-Wylie. But all her life she served others, and considering she had this huge fortune at hand, you know, this amazing amount of money, she spent her life doing, you know, work for other people. In 1926, she went to Romania. She set up the Anglo-Romanian Dispensary for Women and Children and remained in Romania until the Second World War. By 1940, she's back with the French Red Cross. She organises a convalescent home in Beirut. She was later on controller of the Lady Lampson convalescent home in Cairo, always called Lady Lampshade Homes, and remained there until the British forces left Egypt. So as the war is coming to her, she's moving on. She moves to Cyprus in 1956, where she founded and funded the Lady Lampson Club at Crete. And there's many a person that did national service or such like that remembers her cooking eggs or serving tea or coffee at the RAF station there. She refused the CBE. And she died in 1961, and it's a very, very lonely grave. I think it's just got something like Mrs. Doughty-Wylie on it, and she's buried at Akrotiri in Cyprus as well. In the 30s, she had a connection with Wales, and she went, I think, to visit her mother there or something, and she went to Holyhead, and Cubby Hall was being built in the 1930s, and this was largely done with land and materials supplied and paid for by Lily and Doughty-Wylie, on the decision that on the walls inside there would be 2 stones placed, one to her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Doughty-Wylie VC, and one to Holyhead's other Victoria Cross. An absolutely fantastic man that I love to mention as much as I can, Captain John Fox Russell, RAMC, formerly Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Cubby Hall was recently renamed the Jimmy O'Toole Centre. That's it today. It doesn't look very inspiring, but it still helps to tackle poverty and its effects on the people of Holyhead and Anglesey. So still doing the work that Lily wanted it to do. That's Cubby Hall. Let me mention quickly John Fox Russell, who lost his life in Palestine. The Fox Russells were a family that lived in Holyhead, lots and lots of boys. He was awarded the Victoria Cross for conspicuous bravery displayed in action till he was killed. He repeatedly went out to tend to the wounded. He was a doctor, and the murderous fire from the snipers and machine guns, and when no other means were possible, carried the wounded in himself, though exhausted. Fantastic man. There's the boys, the Fox Russell boys. They were all scouts, and I can't help but mention his brother Henry Fox Russell. It's a picture that we have in the archive, which he on the back has put "me in my bus." So he survived the war. He went to Gallipoli. He met his brother on. They crossed over, I think, in Egypt. And but sadly, shortly after the war ended, he was killed in a flying accident near Chester. There's that fantastic picture of Gertrude as well. She was informed of Doughty-Wylie's death at a dinner party about a month after he was killed. Obviously didn't, get the news, as she wasn't the next of kin. She never got over his death. The letters written to her by Doughty-Wylie were donated to the Gertrude Bell archive at Newcastle University, but there was an embargo on them not to be opened until at least after the death of Lily in 1961. Gertrude, again, had this fantastic career. She's at the Cairo conference here. That's one of the things that she got up to after the war. She's standing on the left there. Notice all the men are sitting and don't give a seat to a lady. There's one of the lion cubs, I think, isn't it, that Churchill sort of organised there as well. So she's part of the Cairo conference. She's there with Churchill and T. Lawrence by the Sphinx. She's in the middle there. She founded the Baghdad Antiquities Museum in 1922. It's now the National Museum of Iraq. Again, that got terribly raided in recent wars. And she founded it precisely to stop artifacts being taken out of the country by inverted commas archaeologists at the time. Bell was its first director, but she died in 1926, 12th of July. 2 days before her 58th birthday. So she seems quite young to me these days. It's possible she took a suspected overdose of sleeping pills or just miscalculated. We'll never be sure of that. She's buried in Baghdad, and she left a huge amount of money to the Baghdad Museum, £50,000 in her will. Who was the veiled lady? I realise I sort of must get on a little bit here. So on a calm morning on the 17th of November 1915, despite a terrible storm later in the day and witnessed by many men, a lady came ashore at V Beach, walked slowly up the grave to the grave of Lieutenant Colonel Doughty-Wylie, stayed for a short while and left a wreath. No words were spoken. Now this is recorded by Eric Bush. And there has been speculation since he published his book, whether that was Lily or whether it was Gertrude Bell. So it's a controversy that I mentioned just then that arose after Eric Bush's book on Gallipoli in 1975. And this is there's been a lot of interest recently in Gertrude Bell, but also in the sort of late 60s and 70s, people began to be interested in her work in archaeology and such, like all the things that she did as climbing the Matterhorn and such. And this 50-year embargo had been lifted on the letters, of course, between Doughty-Wylie and Gertrude Bell. It's a controversy that's recently arisen once more. There's been a major biography of Gertrude Bell by Georgina Howell, and we mentioned The Queen of the Desert by Werner Herzog, which is very much his own personal interpretation of events, and really perhaps not historically correct. Lily had considerable nursing experience compared to Gertrude, and she of course was working in a French hospital on the Somme shortly after war broke out. Lily Doughty-Wylie travelled to Gallipoli or the Dardanelles with several nurses on the Mosel. That left Marseille on the 21st of October in 1915, and this is recorded as a fact by Isabel Emsley Hutton in her biography, with a woman's unit in Serbia, Salonika and Sebastopol, written in 1928. Lily Doughty-Wylie, and I think Brian, there was about 6 nurses with her, if I'm right, disembarked early November on the island of Tenedos, then the site of a French hospital, and of course we go back to that comment that I made early on in the talk. Her brother-in-law Henry Doughty was there, somewhat in charge of V Beach as well. Gertrude was in London on the 17th of November. She did not join the Arab Bureau in Cairo until the 26th, November 1915. David Hogarth, who was in charge of the Bureau, stayed for an extra week in order to explain what was required of her to work there, and he left on the 7th of December. It has been suggested she may have stopped off at Port Said and taken a boat to Gallipoli, highly unlikely. From the middle of November, the troops on the peninsula had experienced these terrible storms, absolutely devastating storms, and there was total disruption. Anybody turning up there wanting to put a wreath on the grave, I think would have been completely turned back. Wouldn't even have got there, I don't think. So plans for the evacuation were now in progress. Society. Gertrude Bell was very aware of her place in what she might have been considered Victorian Edwardian society, although we've gone on a king since then. It would have been absolute sort of death for her, social death, to have turned up at the grave before the actual widow turned up there, if anybody got to know about it. And there is no evidence in her letters or her diaries of a visit. So Werner Herzog, I think, was wrong. There's the first memorial that we'll come to. That's sort of his first sort of grave at V Beach. There's a plaque at Wrexham Cathedral, which of course is Wrexham is the home of the RWF, and there's lots and lots of plaques there, and this is one for Doughty-Wylie there. Theberton Hall, there's a memorial as well. The church actually is thatched too, so, and he's in, you know, he's not there as a name right at the top, he's in there. I think probably they've done it by years, but he's not been sort of highlighted. There's a beautiful stained glass window inside Theberton Church, donated by Lily, and of course he's there as the image of St. George, isn't he, slaying the dragon. At Leiston, where Theberton Hall's not far away from there, there's a Doughty-Wylie crescent. The Victor, thanks Steve Snelling for this. The Victor on the 21st of January 1976, if you were all there buying it, that has a story of Doughty-Wylie, a front page as well. And I was lucky enough to attend the 100th commemoration at Theberton, which Steve Beaumont organised, and was able to take the Victoria Cross and all of his decorations and awards to be on display there, excuse me, for the first time. Outside of the RWF Museum. There they are, and we were able, thanks to Brian Cleary, excuse me, who has Lily's medals, we were able to put the medals together, and I'm thinking that that must be the first time in many, many years, if indeed they ever were seen together. So, sorry. So we were able to put those on display. I have to tell you, it's rather nerve-wracking to take a Victoria Cross. It was the original as well, anywhere outside of the museum. And finally, that's the end of my talk, but this talk would not have been possible without Brian, my dear friend. We met for the first time then, although we'd sort of talked to each other before, and all the work that he's done on Doughty-Wylie and Lily as well. So thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for all your help, and everybody else that has helped me over the years with the Doughty-Wylie diaries as well.